Verse 1. Every person is to be in subjection to the governing authorities. For there is no authority except from God, and those which exist are established by God. Say that. The authorities that exist are established by God. Now, when Paul was writing this, Nero was the emperor. The Roman Empire was the emperor, and he's talking about authorities. He then says, therefore, whoever resists authority has opposed the ordinance of God. And they who have opposed will receive condemnation upon themselves. For rulers are not a cause for fear for good behavior, but of evil. Do you want to have no fear of authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise for the same. Let me just give you an illustration. I'm driving down the turnpike. Speed limit on the turnpike is how much? 65. I'm doing 65. A policeman, I see a state trooper coming. You know what I do? I slow down. Even though I'm obeying the law, I'm slow down. What is it? Because I have a fear of authority. Now, what happens when you are speeding? You get your lie together. That's what a lot of people do. Do you realize how fast you were driving? How fast was I driving, officer? And you had your cruise control set on 77. You know what you can look at it. How fast I was driving. You have no fear of authority. And then he says the authorities that exist are ordained by God. That's a hard thing to deal with. Verse 4. Look at verse 4, please, in this translation. For it is, the authority is what? A minister of God to you for good. It's a minister of God to you for good. Say that, please. Now, I want you to say this, whether you believe it or not, personally, emotionally, or viscerally. Read the Bible and just say, policemen are ministers of God to us for good. Blessed quietness, holy quietness. See, no matter what you say, well, I know some really bad policemen. I know some really bad preachers. I know some really bad choir members. I know some really bad church secretaries. That doesn't make them all bad. The choir was trying to get a guy who had no voice at all out, and they couldn't get him out. They did everything they could to get him out, and they couldn't get him out. So they said, Pastor, can you get him out for us? He's ruining our choir. And he said, sure, I can get him out. And so he tried to get him out, and finally he just said, I don't want to leave the choir. He says, come and work for me. Come and be an armor bearer. You can travel with me. He said, I don't want to travel with you. I want to sing in the choir. He says, son, they don't want you in the choir. Who doesn't want me in the choir? None of them want me in the choir. What do they say? He said, they say you can't sing. He said, look, we got 30 people in this church who say you can't preach. You haven't quit. All right, so I'm just saying. Now, would you tell somebody, all policemen aren't bad, but even the bad ones are God's ministers. He says, if you do what is evil, be afraid, for it does not bear the sword for nothing. For it is a minister of God, an avenger who brings wrath on the one who practices evil. Therefore, it's necessary to be in subjection, not only because of wrath, but also because of conscience sake. See, here's what the devil is doing. He's saying Ferguson, and he's saying New York City. He's Ferguson in New York City. And that's the mojo. He's got you focused on something else to keep you from seeing this piece over here. That's the real damage that he's doing. Mark Sharona told us 22 years ago, he said there are only two races. One is a race to heaven, and the other is a race to hell. And which one you are in depends upon your attitude towards the kingdom of God. So I focus on that. And I said to you last week, I think it was last week I said to you, God didn't save me because I was an Afro-American minority, marginalized human being. He saved me because I was a sinner. And that's why he saved you, because you're a sinner. It has nothing to do with your race. Because in hell, there will be all races, all kinds, all creations. In heaven, same thing. And the moment you let the enemy say it's about racism, it's about black and white and brown, it's about all of that, and you're rehearsing all of that, we shall overcome. You know what? We overcame more than, let's say at least 6 years ago when we elected our first black president. We overcame then because 13% of the population could not elect a black man to the highest office unless some white folks voted. Now, I don't believe any racists voted, but I know a lot of white folks had to vote for the president. Y'all there? And I know a lot of white folks had to vote for him twice. So you can't say racism when you have somebody in office that most people think, well, let's just not go there, all right? But the problem is that we live in a world where somebody can say something and make you think that that's the problem when it isn't the problem at all. Yesterday, I'm listening to a lady. She says, I went to this doctor and he told me, she said, I've got tingling in my fingers. And he says, and he said, gave her a couple of exams. He says, you have MS. She said, I just can't believe that. And so she said, after 8 different doctors, one doctor said to her, let's see what you're eating. And eliminated certain foods from her diet and then added them back in. And she says, oh, I had a gluten problem. I'm not MS. Look, your issues are not what people are saying those issues are. Your issues are, I'm dealing with sin. There is sin in Ferguson. There's sin in New York City. There is sin in Pittsburgh. When we have a funeral in this church of a young man who never offended anybody, he's going through the street on his way to work, and he is shot dead several times. They're shooting him as he's lying on the ground. And he's not black on white, white on white. It's a black guy being killed by black people right here in Pittsburgh. That's not a race problem. That's a sin problem.